The evening air in downtown Chicago was thick with the scent of upcoming rain and expensive perfume. Outside the grand ballroom, the city was a blur of yellow taxis and shimmering streetlights, but inside the parking garage the world felt much smaller and significantly colder. A woman walked alone toward the shadows of Section 4B. She was dressed in a floor-length, midnight blue silk dress that shimmered like oil on water. To anyone watching, she looked like the perfect picture of wealth and vulnerability. Her heels made a rhythmic click tap against the oil-stained concrete, a sound that echoed through the hollow silence of the nearly empty structure. She carried a small, beaded clutch bag in one hand and her car keys in the other. She looked tired. Her shoulders slumped slightly, as if the weight of the night's social expectations had finally taken their toll. She reached her vehicle, a silver sedan tucked into a corner spot, and paused. She fumbled with her keys for a second, a small, frustrated sigh escaping her lips. In that moment, she looked exactly like what she was pretending to be. A distracted guest who had stayed too late at a party and just wanted to go home. But beneath the silk and the tired expression, every nerve in her body was screaming with a different kind of energy. 30 feet away, behind a thick concrete pillar, a man named Jax watched her through the gap in the pillars. He was lean, dressed in a dark hoodie that hid his face, and he had spent the last 3 years mastering the art of picking the right target. Beside him stood Two-Tone, a much larger man with a heavy jaw and a restless energy. They were part of a crew that specialized in high-value targets, people leaving the gala who likely had thousands of dollars in jewelry or cash on them and were too shocked to fight back. "She's the one," Jax whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Look at the watch. That's a $50,000 piece if it's a dime. And she's alone. No security, no husband, nothing." Two-Tone nodded, cracking his knuckles. The sound was like dry wood snapping. "She looks like she'd faint if a dog barked at her. Let's make it quick. I want to be out of here before the rain starts." They didn't just walk out. They moved with a practiced coordination. Jax went wide to the left to cut off her path back to the elevators, while Two-Tone walked straight down the center aisle, making no effort to hide his footsteps anymore. The woman didn't look up immediately. She continued to struggle with the car door lock. It wasn't until Two-Tone was 20 feet away that she finally turned her head. Her eyes went wide, and she pulled her clutch bag closer to her chest. It was a classic "pray" response. "Hey there, lady," Two-Tone said, his voice booming in the quiet garage. He flashed a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Looks like you're having some trouble with that door. Maybe we can help you out." The woman took a step back, her back hitting the cold metal of her car. "I'm fine, thank you," she said. Her voice was soft, slightly trembling. "I was just leaving." "The thing is," Jack said, appearing from the shadows behind her, effectively sandwiching her against the vehicle, "we aren't quite ready for you to leave yet. That's a real pretty dress. Probably costs more than my car. And that watch. It's a bit heavy for a wrist like yours, don't you think?" The woman looked from Jax to Two-Tone. She looked trapped. Her breathing became shallow and fast. To the two men, this was the breaking point, the moment where the victim realizes they have no choice but to comply. "Please," she stammered, her eyes darting around the empty garage. "I don't want any trouble. Take the bag. Just let me go." "Oh, we're gonna take the bag," Two-Tone said, stepping closer. He was now within 5 feet of her. He was twice her size, his shadow completely swallowing her. "But we want the watch, the earrings, and the rings, too. And we want you to stay real quiet while we take them. Understand?" The woman lowered her head, her long hair falling over her face. She looked like she was about to cry. "I understand," she whispered. In reality, the woman was doing something the two men couldn't possibly understand. She wasn't looking at the floor in fear. She was looking at their feet. She was measuring the distance between Two-Tone's lead foot and her own center of gravity. She was counting the seconds between Jax's breaths. She was noticing the way Two-Tone carried his weight on his heels, a fatal mistake. For someone trying to control a fight, she wasn't a socialite named Sarah or Emma. She was a woman who had spent 12 years in the most elite shadows of the military. She had survived mountain ambushes in freezing climates and navigated urban warfare where every window held a potential threat. She had been trained by the best to be the best, and her retirement was mostly a formality. She was a ghost in a silk dress. Jax stepped in closer, reaching out a hand to grab her arm. "Give it here," he snapped, his patience wearing thin. The woman didn't move yet. She waited for that perfect, crystalline moment when a predator becomes overconfident. When Jax's hand was inches from her skin, and Two-Tone had relaxed his stance because he thought the job was already over, that was the moment she chose. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. Instead, she let out a slow, controlled exhale. The trembling in her hands vanished instantly, replaced by a stillness that was far more terrifying than any weapon. She looked up, and for the first time, Jax saw her eyes clearly. They weren't wide with fear anymore. They were flat, cold, and incredibly focused. "You really should have stayed home tonight," she said. Her voice wasn't soft anymore. It was steady, like a heartbeat. Two-Tone frowned, confused by the sudden change in her tone. "What did you say?" "I gave you a chance to walk away when you were 20 feet back," she said, her body coiling like a spring. "Now, you're inside my circle, and that's a very dangerous place for you to be." Jax laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You're joking, right? Look at you. You're a twig. What are you going to do, hit me with your purse?" He lunged forward, intending to grab her throat and end the conversation. The woman didn't flinch. She simply shifted her weight by 2 inches. It was a movement so small it was almost invisible, but it changed everything. As Jax's hand closed on empty air, the woman's entire demeanor shifted. The helpless girl was gone. In her place stood a Tier 1 operator who had seen things these men couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. The air in the garage seemed to grow even colder. The hunt was over, but the roles had just been reversed. Jax and Two-Tone didn't know it yet, but they weren't the ones doing the robbing tonight. They were about to receive a very painful lesson in the dangers of making assumptions. The woman's hand, previously clutching the beaded bag, tightened. She didn't drop the bag. She held it like a tactical tool. "Last chance," she said, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Run." They didn't run. They moved in, and that was their final mistake of the night. The big man, Two-Tone, didn't take the warning seriously. He couldn't. In his world, size was the only thing that mattered, and he had at least 100 pounds on the woman standing in front of him. He looked at Jax and grinned, a slow, ugly movement of his lips. He thought she was having some kind of mental breakdown, or perhaps she had watched too many action movies. "Run," Two-Tone barked out a laugh that sounded like gravel grinding together. "Honey, the only thing running tonight is your luck. Now quit the talking and give me that watch before I lose my temper." He reached out with a massive, meaty hand, intending to grab her shoulder and spin her around against the car. It was a lazy move. He wasn't even trying to be fast, because he didn't think he had to be. The woman didn't move back. Most people, when faced with a reaching hand, flinch or retreat. She did the opposite. She stepped into his space. It was a tiny, lightning-fast glide forward. Before Two-Tone could close his fingers, She grabbed his thumb with her free hand and twisted it outward with a sickening pop. The sound was small, but in the quiet of the garage, it sounded like a dry branch snapping. Two-Tone's eyes went wide. His mouth opened to scream, but the sound never made it out. As his body naturally leaned toward the pain of his broken thumb, she used his own momentum against him. She drove her elbow into the soft tissue of his bicep, deadening his arm instantly. Jax, seeing his partner stumble, let out a curse. "Hey, what are you doing?" He didn't wait to see if Two-Tone was okay. He lunged from the side, trying to tackle her. He was faster than the big man, but he was sloppy. He was moving with anger, not strategy. The woman didn't even look at him. She felt his movement through the air shifting behind her. Just as Jax was about to make contact, she pivoted on her left heel. The silk of her dress swished against the concrete. She dropped low, letting Jax's momentum carry him right over her shoulder. He went flying past her, his boots skidding uselessly on the greasy floor before he slammed shoulder first into a parked SUV. She stood back up in one fluid motion, her breathing still steady, her face as calm as if she were waiting for a bus. "I told you to run," she said quietly. Two-Tone was clutching his hand, his face turning a deep shade of purple. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a blind, shaking rage. He wasn't thinking about the watch anymore. He wanted to hurt her for making him feel small. "You're dead," he hissed. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a heavy metal pipe he had been hiding. He swung it in a wide, horizontal arc. It was a killing blow, aimed right for her head. If she had been a normal person, she would have ducked or tried to block it with her arms, which would have resulted in broken bones. Instead, she moved toward the danger. She stepped inside the arc of the swing, getting so close to Two-Tone that the pipe passed harmlessly behind her back. She slammed the palm of her hand into his chin, a strike that sent a massive shock wave through his skull. His head snapped back, his teeth clacking together. While he was dazed, she grabbed his wrist, the one holding the pipe, and applied a pressure point that forced his fingers to fly open. The pipe clattered to the ground, echoing loudly. She didn't stop there. She knew that in a fight against multiple people, you never leave one man standing while you deal with the other. You have to keep them both off balance. Jax was scrambled back to his feet, pulling a small pocketknife from his hoodie. His hands were shaking now. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. They were the hunters. She was supposed to be the prize. "Stay back," Jax yelled, waving the small blade in front of him. "I'll do it! I swear I'll do it!" The woman looked at the knife, then back at Jax's eyes. She saw the fear there. A real professional doesn't get scared of a man with a knife. They respect the tool but exploit the man's panic. "You're holding it wrong," she said. Her voice was conversational, almost helpful. "Your thumb is too high. If you hit anything solid, the blade is going to fold back and cut your own fingers." Jax blinked, momentarily confused by her critique. That split second of confusion was all she needed. She didn't wait for him to process her words. She kicked off the ground, covering the 5-foot gap between them in a heartbeat. Jax tried to stab forward, but she swiped her beaded clutch bag, which was surprisingly heavy, downward onto his forearm. The weight of the bag, combined with the force of her strike, knocked his arm toward the ground. She followed up with a quick strike to his solar plexus. The air left Jax's lungs in a violent whoosh. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Behind her, Two-Tone was trying to recover. He was leaning against her sedan, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see a victim. He didn't even see a woman. He saw a machine. He saw someone who had been forged in a fire he couldn't comprehend. He looked at the exit, then at his partner groveling on the floor, and finally at the woman in the blue dress. "Who are you?" he managed to wheeze out. She didn't answer him. She didn't need to. She just adjusted the strap of her dress where it had slipped slightly during the movement. "It doesn't matter who I am," she said. "What matters is what you are going to do next. My car is parked right here. I'm going to get in it, and I'm going to drive away. If either of you tries to stop me, I won't be so gentle next time." She reached into her bag and pulled out her car remote. The sedan chirped, its lights flashing and reflecting off the damp concrete. Jax was still on the floor, curled into a ball, trying to remember how to breathe. Two-Tone just stood there, his broken thumb throbbing, his jaw likely cracked. He watched her move with a strange kind of awe. She opened her car door and sat inside, the interior light casting a soft glow on her face. She looked perfectly normal again, like a guest leaving a party, but as she started the engine, she looked through the window at Two-Tone. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed. "The world is changing," she told him through the glass. "You should find a new line of work before you run into someone who isn't as patient as I am." She put the car in reverse, the tires chirping softly on the garage floor. As she backed out, she kept her eyes on them, her hands steady on the steering wheel. She was already thinking about her next move, not because she was afraid of them, but because that's what she was trained to do. Always be thinking 3 steps ahead. She drove toward the exit ramp, leaving the 2 men alone in the shadows. As she reached the ticket booth, she saw a police cruiser entering the garage on the opposite side. Someone must have heard the noise or seen something on the cameras. She didn't stop to talk. She didn't need the credit, and she definitely didn't want the paperwork. She just wanted a quiet night and a warm cup of coffee. As she drove out into the rain, the neon lights of the city blurred across her windshield. She was just another face in the crowd again, a ghost in the machine. And back in the garage, 2 men were realizing that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a weapon. It's the person you underestimate. The silver sedan didn't speed away. That was the first thing the 2 men noticed. Most people, after surviving a brush with death, would have floored the accelerator, tires screaming, desperate to put as much distance between themselves and the threat as possible. But the woman drove at a measured, calm pace. She stopped at the exit gate, waited for the wooden arm to lift, and merged smoothly into the light midnight traffic of the city. Inside the car, the atmosphere was strangely peaceful. The heater hummed softly, cutting through the damp chills she had brought in from the garage. She reached up and unclipped her heavy diamond earrings, tossing them into the center console like they were pocket change. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her hair was slightly messy, and there was a faint smudge of grease on her collar from when she had brushed against the SUV, but her eyes were stone cold. She wasn't thinking about the fight. In her mind, that was already archived, a completed task. What she was thinking about was the 3rd man. During the encounter, she had noticed something that most people would have missed. Jax and Two-Tone were amateurs. Their heart rates were too high, and their movements were clumsy. But as she had been backing out of the parking space, she had glanced at the security mirror mounted on the ceiling. For a split second, she saw a black SUV parked 3 levels up, its headlights off, facing the ramp. Inside was a man with a tablet, his face illuminated by the blue light of a screen. He wasn't participating in the robbery, but he was watching it. He was the handler. The realization changed everything. This wasn't a random mugging. This was a coordinated snatch and grab. They hadn't been after her watch. They had been after her. She took a sharp right turn into a narrow alleyway, then another left, weaving through the back streets to see if she was being followed. Sure enough, 2 blocks behind her, a pair of headlights maintained a perfectly consistent distance. They didn't close in, and they didn't fall back. They were ghosting her, a professional surveillance technique used to track a target without spooking them. The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. She reached under the driver's seat and pulled out a small, rugged smartphone that looked nothing like the sleek one in her purse. This was an encrypted device, a relic from her days in the special operations community. She tapped a few icons, and a map of the city appeared, glowing with red and green dots. System active. A neutral voice whispered from the speakers. She didn't call the police. If this was a professional team, the police would only get caught in the crossfire, and she wasn't about to let innocent officers get hurt because of her past. Instead, she began to drive toward the industrial district, a place of empty warehouses, rusted fences, and plenty of room to move. As she drove, she reached into the back seat and grabbed a gym bag. With one hand on the wheel, she unzipped it. Inside wasn't gym clothes. There was a dark, matte black windbreaker, a pair of tactical gloves, and a specialized belt kit. She began to transform. She pulled the windbreaker over her silk dress, effectively hiding the shimmering blue fabric. She swapped her high heels for a pair of flat, rubber-soled shoes she kept for emergencies. She was no longer the lady from the gala. She was back in her uniform. The black SUV behind her accelerated. They realized she was heading away from the populated areas and into the dark. They thought she was cornered. They thought she was choosing a quiet place to hide, which made her an even easier target. She pulled into the yard of an old, abandoned shipyard. The ground was covered in cracked asphalt and puddles of oily water. Huge shipping containers were stacked like giant Lego bricks, creating a maze of steel and shadows. She parked the car right in the middle of an open space, left the engine running, and stepped out. She didn't run for cover. She stood by the driver's side door, waiting. A few seconds later, the black SUV roared into the yard, tires spitting gravel. It skidded to a halt 20 feet away, blocking her only exit. The doors flew open, and 4 men stepped out. They weren't like the thugs from the garage. These men wore tactical vests, earpieces, and moved with a synchronized discipline that screamed mercenary. The man from the 3rd floor, the one with the tablet, stepped forward. He was older, with a military buzz cut and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow. He looked at the woman, then at the silver sedan, and finally at the dark windbreaker she was now wearing. "We've been looking for you for a long time," the leader said. His voice was calm, almost bored. "The agency said you disappeared. They said you went soft, moved to the city, and started attending parties. I told them a predator doesn't just stop being a predator." The woman leaned against her car, her hands visible and relaxed. "And who are you supposed to be?" "The B team." The men around the leader shifted, their hands moving toward the holsters at their sides. The leader held up a hand to steady them. He was staring at her eyes, trying to find a flicker of the fear he usually saw in his targets. He found nothing. "We're the ones who collect the debts you left behind," the leader replied. "There are a lot of people in the world who aren't happy about the work you did in the Middle East. They paid a lot of money to bring you back in a box. Or, if you're smart, you'll come with us quietly, and maybe we keep the box for someone else." The woman looked around the shipyard. She noted the positions of the 4 men. They were in a standard diamond formation. High-level training, but predictable. She also noted the crane hanging overhead and the stack of wooden pallets to her left. "You've got a lot of confidence for a guy who brought a 4-man team to catch a ghost," she said. "I brought what was necessary," the leader snapped. "Now, hands behind your head. Do it now." The woman didn't move. She just looked at the leader and gave him a small, knowing nod. "You know, back when I was with the teams, we had a saying. If you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics suck. Before the leader could respond, the woman reached into the open window of her car and slapped a button on the dashboard. Suddenly, the high-intensity LED light bar she had hidden behind the car's grille exploded into life. It wasn't just a light, it was a strobe, flashing at a frequency designed to disorient the human brain. The shipyard, previously draped in darkness, was suddenly filled with a blinding, flickering white light. The mercenaries cursed, throwing their hands up to shield their eyes. Their night vision-adjusted pupils were instantly overwhelmed. For them, the world had become a chaotic blur of white flashes and deep black shadows. But the woman had closed her eyes a fraction of a second before the flash. She knew the layout of the yard by heart now. She didn't need to see. She knew exactly where they were standing. She moved. She wasn't running away. She was moving toward them. In the strobe light, she looked like a glitch in a video game, appearing in one spot, then disappearing, then reappearing 3 feet closer. The leader tried to draw his weapon, but he felt a cold wind pass by his ear. A second later, he felt a sharp, precise strike to his throat. He went down, gasping, as the woman vanished back into the flickering darkness. The hunt had truly begun, but the mercenaries were no longer the ones holding the map. They were in her world now, and in her world, the darkness was an ally, not an enemy. The helpless woman they had been tracking was gone, replaced by the elite warrior who had earned her reputation in the quietest, deadliest corners of the world. One by one, the shadows began to speak. The strobe light from the sedan continued to pulse, turning the shipyard into a jagged, surreal landscape. To the 3 remaining mercenaries, the world was a nightmare of blinding flashes and total darkness. They were trained professionals, but human biology has its limits. Their eyes couldn't adjust, and their sense of balance was beginning to fail. The man to the left, a tall guy with a tactical headset, swung his arms wildly, trying to grab onto a shipping container for stability. He felt a sudden rush of air to his right. He swung a heavy fist, but he hit nothing but the salty night mist. Before he could pull his arm back, a hand grabbed his wrist. It didn't feel like a small woman's hand. It felt like a steel vise. With a sharp, upward jerk, his balance was completely gone. He felt a foot sweep his legs out from under him, and he hit the wet asphalt hard. Before he could even let out a groan, a firm strike to a nerve point in his neck sent him into a deep, temporary unconsciousness. 2 left. The woman didn't stay to admire her work. She used the rhythm of the strobe to mask her footsteps. Between every flash of light, she moved 6 feet. She was like a shadow that had gained a physical form only to lose it again a second later. The second mercenary, a younger man who was clearly the tech guy of the group, panicked. He pulled a small canister of pepper spray from his belt and started spraying in a wide circle, hoping to create a barrier. "I know you're there," he screamed, his voice cracking. "I can hear you." He was wrong. He couldn't hear her over the sound of the idling car engine and the distant hum of the city. He was hearing his own blood pumping in his ears. The woman appeared directly in front of him during a half-second burst of light. She was so close he could see the reflection of the strobe in her eyes. She wasn't holding a weapon. She didn't need one. She reached out and redirected the canister in his hand, pointing it toward the ground. In the same motion, she delivered a quick, stinging slap to the side of his head, not enough to break bone, but enough to rattle his inner ear. He stumbled back, his legs tangling in a pile of discarded rope. He went down in a heap, his eyes rolling back as his brain tried to process the dizzying spin of the world. The leader, the man with the scar, was the only one left. He was tougher than the others. He had crawled away from the car, putting enough distance between himself and the strobe light to finally blink his eyes back into focus. He stood up, leaning against a rusted crane. He was gasping for air, his throat still burning from her earlier strike, but he was back in the fight. He reached for a heavy flashlight on his belt and clicked it on. The beam was powerful, cutting through the strobe light's confusion. He swept it back and forth, desperate to find her. "You're good," the leader croaked, spitting a bit of blood onto the ground. "Better than the files said. But you're tired. I can hear your breathing. You can't keep this up forever." The woman's voice came from the darkness, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I'm not the one leaning against a crane just to stay upright." The leader spun toward the sound, shining his light into a gap between two shipping containers, empty. "Why don't you come out and finish this?" the leader challenged. "Or are you afraid that without your little light show, you're just a girl in a dress?" The strobe lights suddenly cut out. The sedan's engine died. The shipyard plunged into a heavy, oppressive silence. The only light now came from the leader's trembling flashlight. "The lights were for your benefit," the woman's voice whispered terrifyingly close. "I wanted to give you a chance to see me coming. Now you don't get that luxury." The leader lost his nerve. He started backing away toward his SUV, the flashlight beam bouncing off the steel walls of the containers. He caught a glimpse of blue silk, the hem of her dress vanishing around a corner. He bolted after it, thinking he had her trapped in a dead-end alleyway between the stacks. He rounded the corner, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He raised his light. The alley was empty, but hanging from a hook above him was the blue silk dress. She had stripped it off, using it as a decoy. The leader realized his mistake a second too late. He looked up, and in the dim moonlight, he saw her. She was perched on top of the shipping container, dressed in the matte black windbreaker and dark leggings. She looked like a gargoyle carved from the night itself. She dropped. She didn't land on him with her full weight. That would have broken his spine. Instead, she used her legs to pin his arms to his sides as they hit the ground together. She rolled, using the momentum to flip him onto his back. Before he could draw a breath to yell, she had her forearm pressed firmly against the large vein in his neck. It was a blood choke perfectly executed. "Who sent you?" she asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of anger. It was the voice of an interrogator. The leader struggled, his face turning a dark red. He tried to reach for a hidden knife in his boot, but she increased the pressure. 5 seconds until you go to sleep," she said calmly. 4, 3, wait, the leader wheezed. It was a private contract. We didn't get a name, just a digital transfer and a location. They said you had something, a drive, something you took when you left." The woman frowned. She hadn't taken anything when she retired. She had wanted a clean break. If someone was telling people she had a drive, it meant she was being framed. Someone wanted her out in the open. Someone wanted her hunted. She loosened her grip just enough for him to breathe, but not enough for him to move. Where was the transfer from? "Offshore," the leader gasped. "Caymans. That's all I know. I swear." She looked into his eyes and saw that he was telling the truth. He was just a mercenary, a tool used by someone much higher up the food chain. "Go to sleep," she whispered. She applied the pressure again. In seconds, the leader's eyes fluttered closed, and his body went limp. She stood up, dusting off her black jacket. She looked around the silent shipyard. 4 men were down, none of them permanently injured, but all of them thoroughly defeated. She walked back to her car. She felt the cold rain finally begin to fall, splashing against the hot hood of the sedan. She reached into the back seat, pulled out a fresh pair of jeans and a hoodie, and quickly changed out of her tactical gear. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel. The quiet life she had worked so hard to build was over. The gala, the dress, the fancy apartment, It was all a shell that had just been cracked. She pulled out her encrypted phone and typed in a single code. The screen flickered, and a set of coordinates appeared. They pointed to a small cabin in the woods, hundreds of miles away. "Time to go to ground," she muttered to herself. She started the car and began to drive. As she passed the unconscious leader, she tossed his own flashlight out the window. It landed in a puddle, its beam pointing up at the rainy sky like a signal fire. She had been a Navy SEAL. She had been a ghost. And now, she was something even more dangerous, a woman who knew she was being hunted and had decided to hunt back. As she reached the main road, she saw the blue and red lights of more police cars heading toward the shipyard. She turned the opposite way, disappearing into the curtain of rain. She had a long drive ahead of her, and a lot of questions that needed answers. The first part of the night was over. The real war was just beginning. The road ahead was a long ribbon of black asphalt, glistening under the relentless rain. The woman drove for 3 hours, switching cars twice, at prearranged locations that only a handful of people in the world knew about. She finally pulled up to a small, nondescript house on the edge of a quiet lake, far from the neon lights of the city. This was her safe house, a place where she wasn't a guest at a gala or a target for mercenaries. Here, she was simply a shadow. Inside the house, she didn't turn on the lights. She moved through the rooms by touch and memory. Her eyes long ago adjusted to the dark. She sat at a small wooden table and opened a hidden compartment in the floorboards. Out came a heavy, reinforced laptop. She plugged it in, her fingers dancing across the keys with the same precision she had used to dismantle the men in the garage. "Identify source of the Cayman transfer," she commanded the screen. While the computer whirred, she went to the kitchen and splashed cold water on her face. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror above the sink. The exhaustion was there, tugging at the corners of her eyes. But the fire hadn't gone out. She realized the leader of the Merc team was right about one thing. You don't just stop being a predator. But he was wrong about the drive. She didn't have a physical disk. The information they wanted was stored in the one place no one could reach, her memory. A soft ping came from the laptop. She walked back and looked at the results. The money hadn't come from a foreign government or a criminal cartel. It had come from a private security firm called Apex Solutions. The woman felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Apex was run by a man she used to trust, a former commander, who had gone private after his service ended. He knew her tactics because he had helped refine them. He knew her locations because he had helped scout them. He wasn't trying to recover a drive. He was trying to eliminate the only person who knew about the illegal contracts he had signed during his time in the military. "So that's how it is," she whispered to the empty room. She knew she couldn't stay in the cabin. If he had sent one team, more were coming. And the next team wouldn't be amateurs. She needed to end this at the source. Instead of hiding, she did the last thing anyone expected. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 5 years. "Apex Solutions, secure line," a voice answered. "Put him on," she said. Her voice was like ice. "Tell him the helpless girl is on the line." There was a long silence, then the sound of a door closing and the heavy breathing of a man who knew he had made a terrible mistake. "I heard you had a busy night," the man on the other end said. His voice was deep and gravelly. "You should have stayed retired. You're making things complicated." "You sent men to a public garage to snatch me," she said. "You put civilians at risk. That's not how we do things." "The world is different now," the man replied. "Information is the only currency that matters. You know too much about the old days. I can't have you walking around as a liability." "I wasn't a liability until you sent those men," she countered. "I was a ghost. I was gone. But you brought me back. And now I'm coming for the ledger. You're one woman, he laughed, though it sounded forced. I have an entire small army between me and the front door. Then you better tell them to stay awake, she said, and she hung up. She didn't head for his high-rise office or his fortified estate. She knew him better than that. He would be at the Nest, a small private airfield where he kept his getaway plane. It was his failsafe. If things got messy, he would flee the country and manage his empire from the shadows of a place with no extradition. She arrived at the airfield just as the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting a pale gray light over the runway. The rain had turned into a light mist. She saw the private jet idling, its engines a low, hungry growl. There were 6 guards stationed around the perimeter, all of them heavily armed and wearing high-end night vision gear. She didn't use a gun. She didn't use a gun. She didn't need to make noise. She used a small drone she had modified herself. It was no bigger than a bird and moved just as silently. She flew it over the guards, dropping small pressurized canisters of a fast-acting sleep gas. One by one, the guards slumped over, their weapons clattering harmlessly against the pavement. It was clean. It was professional. It was the Navy SEAL way. She walked across the tarmac, her boots clicking softly. She climbed the stairs of the jet and stepped inside. The man was there, sitting in a leather chair, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, and a look of pure shock on his face. "How?" he gasped, his hand reaching for a pistol on the table. She was faster. In a blur of motion, she had the pistol in her hand, the magazine ejected, and the frame tossed onto a nearby sofa. She stood over him, not with anger, but with a quiet, terrifying authority. "You forgot the most important lesson you ever taught me," she said. "Never underestimate the person who has nothing left to lose." She didn't hurt him. Instead, she took his laptop and his phone. She sat across from him and began to upload every file, every contract, and every bank statement to a secure server at the Department of Justice. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his face pale. "You'll ruin everything. You'll go down with me." "I don't care," she said, watching the progress bar hit 99%. "I was never in this for the money or the power. I was in it for the person next to me. And you betrayed that." The upload finished. She stood up and walked toward the exit of the plane. "The authorities will be here in 10 minutes, she told him. "The evidence is already in their hands. There's nowhere to run." She stepped off the plane and into the cool morning air. She didn't wait for the sirens. She walked toward the edge of the airfield, where the tall grass met the forest. As the first rays of the sun hit her face, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She had been a warrior, a target, and a hunter. But as she disappeared into the trees, she was finally something else. Free. The world would remember the story of the woman who looked helpless and turned out to be a hurricane. But she wouldn't be there to hear the stories. She was already moving on to her next chapter, where the only thing she had to protect was her own peace of mind.